Drag him out of my building. Victoria Hale's voice cut through the glass atrium of Hale Dynamics so cleanly that even the soft conversations around the reception desk died at once. Two uniformed police officers stood beside Ethan Cole, a 43-year-old single father in a faded navy work jacket, plain gray shirt, worn jeans, and scuffed boots that looked painfully ordinary against 60 floors of polished marble and steel. Around them, employees stopped walking. Executives lowered their phones. Through the conference room windows above, members of the board watched the scene unfolding less than an hour before the company was supposed to finalize the biggest contract in its history. Victoria stood 10 feet away, immaculate in a charcoal business suit, her expression controlled but cold. "Mr. Cole, you were told to leave." "I was told," Ethan replied quietly. "Then why are you still here?" "Because you haven't heard what I came to tell you." A few people exchanged amused looks. Victoria did not. At 38, she had built her reputation on certainty, speed, and never allowing anyone to embarrass her in her own company. Today, with a billion-dollar agreement waiting upstairs and investors watching every move, patience felt like a luxury. "You walked into a restricted executive meeting," she said. "You questioned my engineering team, refused security's instructions, and disrupted a contract signing. We're finished." Ethan's face barely changed. He wasn't angry. He wasn't pleading. That quietness seemed to irritate her more than an argument would have. One officer stepped closer and politely motioned toward the revolving doors. Ethan glanced down as the zipper of his old backpack opened slightly. A folded sheet of paper slipped onto the marble. He bent, picked it up, and carefully tucked it back inside. For 1 second, Victoria saw the drawing on it. A little girl standing beside a tall man beneath 3 crooked yellow stars, with the words "Daddy, come home, safe" written in purple crayon. "Your daughter?" one officer asked. "Lily," Ethan said. 9 years old. Then he looked toward Victoria again. "I promised I'd be home for dinner." Something uncomfortable flickered across her face, but vanished almost immediately. "Then you should go." Ethan nodded once. "I will." He allowed the officers to guide him toward the exit without resistance. Behind him, someone whispered, "Who does this guy think he is?" Another employee gave a nervous laugh. Ethan heard both. He kept walking. Quiet dignity had taught him something pride never could. Sometimes the strongest answer was the one you refused to shout. Then, halfway across the atrium, he stopped. The officers stopped with him. Victoria's heels clicked once against the marble. "Now what?" Ethan slowly turned his head. "Are you sure?" "About what?" "About removing me before that contract is signed." The room became strangely still. Victoria folded her arms. "Is that supposed to be a threat?" "No, ma'am." His voice remained almost gentle. "It's your last chance to listen. I don't take ultimatums from strangers." Ethan studied her for a moment, almost sadly, then reached into his pocket. "Understood. What are you doing?" He took out an old phone, its case cracked near one corner. "Calling my daughter." Victoria gave a dismissive shake of her head and turned toward the elevators. Ethan looked at the screen, but he didn't press Lily's name. His thumb moved to another contact, one saved only as David. And as the officers waited beside him, Ethan pressed call. The call connected before Ethan reached the revolving doors. "Cole," a man answered. "You're early." Ethan lowered his voice. "David, I need you to hold for a minute. Don't do anything yet." The two officers exchanged a glance, but Ethan offered them a small nod and slipped the phone back into his pocket without ending the call. Across the atrium, Victoria was already walking toward the executive elevators. To everyone watching, the moment was over. The troublesome stranger had been removed, the CEO had regained control, and Hale Dynamics could return to the business of making history. But Ethan knew something they didn't. 6 hours earlier, before sunrise had burned the gray from the Chicago skyline, he had been standing in his small kitchen packing Lily's lunch. Peanut butter sandwich, apple slices, chocolate milk. 3 things, always arranged the same way because Lily insisted food tasted better when life felt organized. "Big meeting today?" she had asked from the table. Ethan smiled while fastening her lunchbox. "Something like that." "Are you nervous?" "A little." Lily studied him with the seriousness only a 9-year-old could manage. Mom used to say nervous means you care. Ethan went still for half a second. She did. By 7:10 a.m., after dropping Lily at school, Ethan drove his 12-year-old pickup downtown and parked 3 blocks from Hale Dynamics because the visitor garage charged $38 a day. He arrived carrying the same faded backpack, the same worn jacket, and a confidential invitation sent 48 hours earlier by someone Victoria had never expected him to know. At reception, his name caused confusion. No executive title, no company listed, just Ethan Cole, technical review consultant. The receptionist finally issued him a temporary badge and directed him to the 56th floor. Upstairs, the atmosphere was entirely different. Lawyers moved between conference rooms. Assistants carried presentation folders embossed with Hale Dynamics' silver logo. Engineers whispered over tablets while a digital clock counted down toward the afternoon signing. The company's new autonomous logistics platform had just secured a federal infrastructure partnership worth more than $1 billion, and Victoria Hale intended to announce it before markets closed. Ethan had been in the building less than 20 minutes when he saw the problem. It appeared on a diagnostic screen inside a restricted engineering suite, a synchronization fault buried deep in the emergency override architecture, small enough to escape a demonstration, serious enough that Ethan stopped breathing for a beat. "Run that sequence again," he told a young engineer named Marcus Reed. Marcus frowned. "Who authorized you to access this?" "Run it again." "Sir, I asked who authorized you." Ethan pointed calmly at the screen. "If I'm wrong, you lose 60 seconds. If I'm right, you need those 60 seconds. Something in his tone persuaded Marcus. He reran the simulation. The same warning appeared. Then again. 3 tests. 3 failures. Marcus's confidence disappeared. That can't be right. It is. The independent audit cleared us. Ethan leaned closer to the monitor. They audited the application layer. This is underneath it. Marcus stared at him. How would you know? Ethan's eyes settled on a line of source architecture that hadn't been publicly documented in years. Because I recognized the design. 20 minutes later, Victoria entered the room surrounded by senior executives. She looked at Ethan's temporary badge, then at the delayed testing schedule, and made the assumption that would change everything. Who let this contractor stop my certification? She demanded. Marcus tried to explain, but Victoria raised one hand. Ethan simply turned the monitor toward her. Ms. Hale, your contract cannot be safely authorized today. Her expression hardened. And who exactly gave you the authority to decide that? Ethan reached into his jacket and placed an old identification card face down on the table. Someone who knows what this system was before your company ever owned it. Victoria looked at the face down identification card, but she did not touch it. That still doesn't answer my question. Ethan stood beside the diagnostic monitor while Marcus Reed remained unusually quiet. The system has an authorization flaw in its emergency synchronization layer, Ethan said. Under normal conditions, you may never see it. But if 2 regional control centers issue conflicting instructions within the same recovery window, the override can fail to reconcile them correctly. Victoria glanced toward her chief technology officer, Daniel Mercer. Is that true? Daniel adjusted his glasses. We've completed every required certification test. That wasn't my question. Daniel hesitated. We haven't reproduced what Mr. Cole is describing outside this simulation. Ethan tapped the screen once. You reproduced it 3 times this morning. The room changed. Not dramatically. No one raised a voice. But the polished confidence around the conference table began to thin. Victoria stepped closer. Our independent auditors cleared this platform. They cleared what they were given. And you're suggesting we hid something? No, Ethan met her eyes. I'm suggesting nobody knew where to look. That answer irritated her because it carried no accusation she could attack. Victoria had spent 14 years building Hale Dynamics into a company that investors trusted precisely because she refused uncertainty. Today, uncertainty had arrived wearing worn jeans and a visitor badge. The signing begins at 2, she said. Federal representatives are already in the building. We have lenders, insurers, and partners waiting upstairs. I am not postponing a billion-dollar agreement because one outside consultant found an anomaly in a simulation. Ethan's expression remained steady. Then don't postpone it because of me. Postpone it because the anomaly is real. Daniel stepped between them verbally, trying to soften the collision. Victoria, we could isolate the module and review it after signing. Ethan shook his head. Once the certification is signed, you are representing that the architecture meets the required safety threshold. Victoria turned sharply toward him. You've made your point. Not yet. Ethan opened his backpack and removed a thin folder. Inside were handwritten notes, printed architecture diagrams, and several pages marked with dates from years earlier. He placed one diagram beside the current Hale Dynamics schematic. Marcus leaned forward first. His face tightened. The two designs were nearly identical. Where did you get that? He whispered. From my files. Those architecture documents aren't public. I know. Victoria's eyes moved from the old diagram to Ethan. Who are you? For the first time that morning, Ethan looked tired rather than calm. Right now, I'm a father who would rather pick up his daughter after school than argue in a boardroom. That isn't an answer. It's the only one that matters until you decide whether you care more about the deadline or the truth. Silence settled over the room. Air conditioning hummed above them. Somewhere beyond the glass walls, an elevator chimed. Victoria looked toward the clock. 11:18 a.m., less than 3 hours remained. Here's what's going to happen, she said. Daniel's team will review your findings. You will sign a statement confirming that your concerns are preliminary and do not justify delaying certification. Ethan did not reach for the paper. Daniel slid toward him. I can't sign that. Victoria's jaw tightened. Can't or won't? Both. Mr. Cole, refusing could damage this company, this deal, and your own professional future. Ethan slowly turned the old identification card face up, but Victoria's attention had already shifted to an assistant entering with an urgent message. Only Marcus saw the faded emblem and the words beneath Ethan's photograph. His eyes widened. Ethan covered the card again with his hand. There is a third choice, Ms. Hale, he said quietly. You stop the signing yourself before someone with final authorization stops it for you. Victoria never saw what Marcus had seen on the old identification card. Her assistant, Claire Bennett, crossed the room quickly and handed her a tablet. The federal delegation moved the final briefing up 20 minutes, Claire said. They want confirmation that certification is complete before they come upstairs. Victoria read the message, then looked at the unsigned statement in front of Ethan. Perfect. Then we're done wasting time. Ethan remained still. You're not wasting time. You're being given some. Daniel Mercer cleared his throat. Ethan, we understand your concern, but the system passed months of review. One edge case simulation doesn't invalidate the entire platform. It wasn't one simulation. Ethan pointed toward the diagnostic history. Marcus ran it 3 times. Marcus nodded reluctantly. He's right. Victoria turned toward him. Can your team correct it? Marcus swallowed. Maybe, but not before 2. Then isolate it. That's what Mr. Cole warned us not to do. The room fell quiet again. Victoria's patience finally cracked. Enough. Everyone keeps talking as though this man has authority here. He doesn't. Ethan looked at her without anger. Authority doesn't make a flaw disappear. Neither does arrogance make you indispensable. I never said I was indispensable. Then sign the statement. Victoria pushed the document toward him. Ethan read the first line, then calmly slid it back. No, think carefully. I already did. You could walk out of here today with a generous consulting fee and a clean professional record. Ethan's gaze hardened slightly. And what happens if the system fails after I sign? Our engineers handle it. That isn't what I asked. Victoria said nothing. Ethan continued, his voice low. People trust signatures because they assume somebody behind them was willing to say no. If I sign something I know is misleading, then my name becomes part of the lie. Daniel exhaled. Nobody is asking you to lie. Ethan tapped the sentence, stating there was no known technical basis for postponement. That sentence is asking me to forget what we saw 30 minutes ago. Victoria stepped closer. You have two choices, Mr. Cole. Sign it, collect your fee, and leave professionally, or refuse, and I make certain every contractor working with Hale Dynamics knows you disrupted a federal partnership without sufficient evidence. Marcus looked down. Claire stopped typing. Even Daniel seemed uncomfortable. Ethan glanced at the clock, then toward the skyline beyond the glass. For a moment, he thought about Lily sitting in her fourth-grade classroom, probably drawing stars in the margins of her math worksheet. His wife had once told him that character was what remained when doing the right thing became expensive. He understood the price now. There's a third choice, Ethan said. Victoria gave a humorless smile. You mentioned that. I refuse to sign, and you delay certification long enough to investigate properly. Not happening. Then whatever comes next belongs to your decision, not mine. Victoria stared at him. Are you threatening this company? I'm trying to protect it. Security. Claire hesitated before reaching for the phone. Marcus stepped forward. Victoria, wait. I saw his identification. Every face turned toward him. Ethan's expression changed for the first time. Marcus. But the young engineer continued. That card wasn't from a consulting firm. Victoria Froneth. Then where was it from? Marcus looked at Ethan, suddenly understanding why the old architecture. Diagrams matched perfectly. I only saw it for a second, but it had a federal program seal. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Ethan quietly returned the card to his jacket. You should listen to your engineer. Instead, Victoria picked up the phone herself. Security, send someone to 56. Now, Ethan closed his folder with deliberate care. Once you do this, Ms. Hale, there may not be enough time to reverse what follows. Victoria held his gaze. Remove him. And downstairs, while security was being called and the contract clock kept counting down, Ethan's phone silently received a message from David containing only 5 words. Final authorization awaits your confirmation. Security arrived on the 56th floor less than 3 minutes later, but Ethan had already packed his diagrams into the faded backpack. He checked David's message once more, locked the screen, and slipped the phone into his pocket. Victoria stood beside the conference table with Daniel and Claire, watching him as though his refusal had become a personal challenge. Last opportunity, she said. Sign the statement. Ethan pulled the zipper closed. No, then your involvement ends here. My involvement can end, he replied. The problem won't. Marcus remained near the diagnostic station, staring at the 3 failed simulations. Victoria, we should at least postpone the certification briefing. We have independent auditors. They didn't test this layer. Daniel? Victoria asked. Daniel hesitated. That hesitation lasted only 2 seconds, but everyone noticed it. I prefer another review, he admitted. Victoria's expression tightened. After the signing, Ethan lifted his backpack onto one shoulder. You keep treating the deadline like it's more important than what your signature means. And you keep acting like you understand what's at stake. I understand exactly what's at stake. Victoria stepped closer. Do you? 11,000 employees depend on this company. Our partners have invested years in this platform. Hundreds of millions of dollars have already been committed. You expect me to jeopardize all of that because a contractor walked in this morning and told me everyone else. Miss something? Yes. The simplicity of the answer stopped her. Ethan continued quietly. If the alternative is certifying something you now know may be unsafe, yes. Victoria stared at him. You really think you're the only principled person in this room? No. I think several people here know what the right decision is. They're just afraid of what it costs. Marcus lowered his eyes. Daniel said nothing. The air conditioning whispered through the vents while the digital clock changed to 11:47. Victoria picked up the unsigned statement. You're making a serious mistake. Ethan looked at the paper, then at her. My daughter is 9. One day she'll be old enough to understand what I do for a living. I'd rather explain why I lost work than explain why I signed something I knew wasn't true. Something shifted behind Victoria's eyes, but pride closed the door before Grace could enter. Take him downstairs. The security officers approached respectfully. Ethan offered no resistance. As he walked toward the elevator, Marcus followed several steps behind. Mr. Cole, Ethan turned. Marcus lowered his voice. That card. What program were you with? An older one. You knew the architecture before Hale acquired it. Ethan said nothing. Did you build it? Marcus asked. The elevator doors opened. Ethan stepped inside, then looked back. Find revision 7 in the legacy repository. Look at the original authorization page. The doors closed. Marcus immediately returned to his terminal. Upstairs, Victoria headed toward the executive briefing room, convinced the disruption was finally behind her. Downstairs, Ethan crossed the marble atrium under curious stares until 2 police officers, already called by building security after the earlier dispute, met him near reception. Victoria arrived minutes later and gave the order that would soon echo through the company. Ethan was to be escorted out. He remained calm, pausing only when Lily's drawing slipped from his backpack. Then came the question. Are you sure? Victoria was sure. Ethan made the call. But 56 floors above them, Marcus had found revision 7. He opened the authorization page and froze. Beside the original system patent were 2 names. One belonged to a federal research authority. The second belonged to Ethan Cole. Underneath was a clause Marcus read twice before grabbing his phone. Final technical authorization remains with the original system architect. David, freeze the authorization. Ethan's voice was so quiet that the words barely traveled beyond the 2 officers standing beside him, but Victoria heard them. She stopped halfway toward the elevators and turned. Excuse me. Ethan kept the phone against his ear. Hold the certification and suspend the release until the synchronization fault is independently reviewed. There was a brief pause. David's answer came calmly through the receiver. Confirming. You're invoking original architect authority. Ethan looked across the atrium at Victoria. Employees had begun gathering near the glass railings above, drawn by the strange stillness below. I am. Understood. I need your verbal confirmation for the record. Ethan took a breath. Ethan Cole. Authorization withheld. The call had lasted 17 seconds. He ended it and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Victoria stared at him, then gave a short, disbelieving shake of her head. You expect me to believe one phone call can interfere with a federal contract? No, Ethan said. I expected you to listen before I had to make it. You have no authority over Hale Dynamics. I never said I did. Then what exactly did you just freeze? Before Ethan could answer, Victoria's phone vibrated. Then Claire's. Then Daniel's. Across the atrium, 3 executives reached for their devices almost simultaneously. The sound was small, ordinary, almost harmless, yet something about the timing drained the confidence from Victoria's face. Claire opened the notification first. Her eyes widened. Victoria. What? The certification portal changed status. Daniel was already reading his own screen. That's impossible. Victoria stepped toward him. What changed? Daniel swallowed. Final technical authorization has been withheld. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The atrium's enormous digital display still showed Hale Dynamics' promotional banner celebrating a partnership, but beneath it, on phones and tablets across the building, the transaction had stopped moving forward. Victoria looked at Ethan. What did you do? Well, I told you I might have to do. Reverse it. I can't certify a system with a known, unresolved fault. Then remove your objection. That would be the same thing. Her voice dropped. Do you understand what you're jeopardizing? Ethan's expression softened, not with weakness, but disappointment. That's what I've been trying to explain all morning. The elevator opened behind Victoria. Marcus hurried out, holding a tablet against his chest. He crossed the marble floor quickly, ignoring the curious employees. Victoria, stop. She turned. Not now, Marcus. You need to see this now. He held out the screen. On it was revision 7, the legacy authorization record Ethan had told him to find. Victoria scanned the page once, then again. Her eyes stopped on Ethan's name. Original system architect? She whispered. Marcus nodded. The platform Hale acquired was built on his core architecture. The transfer agreement preserved final safety authorization because the federal program retained oversight of the original patents. Victoria looked toward Ethan as though seeing him for the first time. The worn jacket remained the same. The scuffed boots remained the same. So did the quiet eyes she had mistaken for uncertainty. Why wasn't I told, she asked. Ethan answered gently. You were. I came here this morning. Before Victoria could respond, Claire's phone rang. She answered, listened, and slowly lowered it. That was legal. Her face had gone pale. The federal delegation has suspended the signing. Victoria's composure finally slipped. Suspended? Claire looked at the notification again. Pending technical authorization, the contract has been removed from today's execution schedule. Upstairs, the giant conference room display refreshed. The billion-dollar agreement disappeared from the signing queue. No alarm sounded. No one shouted. It simply vanished. And in the silence that followed, Victoria finally understood that Ethan's 17-second call had not asked someone powerful to rescue him. The authority had been his all along. Victoria Hale stared at the empty signing queue as if the missing contract might reappear if she waited long enough. It did not. Around her, the atrium had gone almost unnaturally quiet. The two officers beside Ethan no longer seemed certain there was anywhere they needed to take him. One finally looked toward Victoria. Ma'am, do you still want us to escort Mr. Cole outside? The question landed differently now. Victoria glanced at Ethan, then at the employees watching from the balconies. Less than 5 minutes earlier, she had wanted everyone to see that she controlled her building. Now every witness had seen how little control mattered when it was built on incomplete information. Give us a moment, she said. The officers stepped away. Ethan did not celebrate. He did not smile. He simply adjusted the strap of Lily's backpack and looked at the clock above reception. 12:14 p.m. I need to understand this, Victoria said. Then ask, why do you still have authorization over technology my company legally acquired? Marcus answered before Ethan could. Because Hale acquired the commercial platform, not unrestricted control of the protected core. He turned the tablet toward Victoria. The original federal development agreement required independent authorization for safety-critical deployments. Ethan's signature authority survived every later transfer. Daniel had arrived beside them and was scrolling rapidly through legal documents. He's right. It's buried in the acquisition schedules. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Buried? Referenced? Daniel corrected carefully. But yes, easy to overlook unless you knew the original program. Victoria turned back to Ethan. And you knew. I wrote part of it. Why leave something this important hidden? Ethan's expression tightened. It wasn't hidden. People stopped asking who built the foundation after they started making money from the floors above it. Marcus looked down at the old architecture file. How much of the platform is yours? Ethan paused. Enough to recognize when someone changed something they didn't fully understand. Daniel stiffened. We modernized it. Most of those changes were good. Ethan nodded toward Marcus. Your engineers did strong work. Except the synchronization layer. Marcus said. Except that. Victoria folded her arms, but the gesture no longer looked commanding. It looked defensive. So this was never about humiliating me. Ethan seemed genuinely surprised. Why would it be? You could have told everyone downstairs who you were. Would you have listened? Victoria opened her mouth, then stopped. Ethan continued. I came through the front door. I showed my invitation. I explained the fault. I gave your team the test sequence. I gave you 3 chances to delay certification. His voice remained calm. You didn't need my resume to decide whether evidence deserved respect. That sentence struck harder than accusation because it was true. Claire approached, holding her phone. Victoria, the board wants an emergency meeting. Federal procurement is requesting written clarification within the hour, and our financing partners have paused release conditions. Victoria closed her eyes briefly. How bad? Claire hesitated. If authorization isn't restored, the agreement cannot proceed. Ethan looked toward the elevators. It shouldn't proceed today. Could you restore it after the fault is corrected? Victoria asked. If the correction passes independent testing. How long? Depends on whether your people spend their time fixing the system or protecting reputations. Marcus almost smiled, but Ethan's face remained serious. Victoria studied him. You're willing to help us after what happened? Ethan glanced toward the officers, then toward Lily's drawing tucked safely inside his backpack. I was trying to help you before it happened. Daniel's phone suddenly rang. He answered, listened, and his face changed. That was federal counsel. What now? Victoria asked. Daniel looked directly at Ethan. They've located the original patent record. He lowered the phone slowly. Ethan wasn't merely one of the architects. Marcus stared at him. Daniel swallowed. He was the principal designer, and the authorization clause exists because 12 years ago, he personally refused to transfer final safety control to any corporation. Victoria went still. Ethan said nothing. Daniel looked again at the document on his screen. There's more. Hale Dynamics' entire billion-dollar agreement depends on a patent license that can remain active only while Ethan certifies the deployment as compliant. Victoria read the licensing clause twice before looking up. So, if Ethan refuses certification, the contract doesn't merely pause. Daniel's silence answered before his words did. Without compliance approval, Hale Dynamics cannot deploy the protected architecture under this agreement. Claire lowered her phone. Marcus stared at Ethan with the stunned expression of someone realizing that the quiet man, nearly escorted onto the sidewalk, held the legal key to the company's largest project. Victoria's voice softened. You could destroy this deal. Ethan shook his head. No, the flaw could destroy the deal. I'm giving you a chance to fix it before that happens. After I called the police on you? Those are two separate problems. Victoria looked toward the officers waiting near reception, then back at Ethan. Most people would use this moment differently. Most people haven't spent 9 years explaining character to a daughter. Ethan glanced at the clock. Lily doesn't care whether people know my name. She cares whether I come home as the man I tell her to become. The words settled into the atrium without drama. Victoria had expected revenge because revenge made sense in the world she understood. Leverage was used. Weakness was exploited. Humiliation was returned with interest. Ethan seemed to operate by another set of rules. Daniel opened the technical file. If we assign every engineering team immediately, we might isolate the synchronization defect by tonight. Not isolate, Ethan said. Correct. That could take longer. Then it takes longer. Victoria looked at him. What do you need? Ethan turned toward Marcus. Revision 7, Revision 9, and every modification made to the emergency override after the acquisition. Marcus nodded. I can have them upstairs in 10 minutes. I also want an independent validation team. Nobody who reports directly to the people responsible for today's certification. Daniel frowned. That's unusual. So, is discovering a safety defect hours before signing. Victoria took a slow breath. Approved. Ethan continued. No retaliation against Marcus or anyone who raised concerns. Approved. And nobody rewrites this morning as a misunderstanding. Victoria's face tightened. Meaning, your engineers need to know they can stop a deadline when evidence tells them something is wrong. If everyone learns that silence protects their careers, you'll have the same problem again with a different system. For several seconds, Victoria said nothing. Then she nodded. Approved. Ethan looked almost surprised. Good. Claire's phone buzzed again. The board is waiting upstairs. Victoria glanced toward the elevators. Then they can wait another 5 minutes. She turned to the two officers. Officers, Mr. Cole is not being removed. I called you because I made a judgment before I had the facts. I'm sorry for wasting your time. One officer nodded. Understood, Mom. They left quietly. Victoria then faced the employees gathered around the atrium. Her reputation had been built on never appearing uncertain. Yet for the first time that day, she chose something harder than certainty. Everyone, she said, her voice carrying through the open space. Today's signing has been suspended because Mr. Cole identified a technical issue our review process failed to catch. He warned us. I did not listen. That decision was mine. No one moved. No one whispered. Ethan watched her carefully. This was not redemption yet, but it was the first honest step toward it. Then Marcus's tablet chimed. He looked down at the newly retrieved legacy files and immediately crossed toward Ethan. I found the modification. Ethan studied the screen. A single authorization routine had been altered 18 months earlier. Daniel leaned closer. Can we fix it? Ethan traced the code with one finger. Yes. Victoria Hale. Then the contract can come back? Ethan looked at her. If the system earns my signature. Marcus scrolled farther and suddenly stopped. Ethan, there's something else. He turned the tablet around. The modification record carried an executive approval code. Victoria recognized it instantly. Her face went still. The change that had endangered the billion-dollar contract had been approved from her own office. Victoria stared at the approval code as if it belonged to someone else. It did not. The authorization had come from her executive office 18 months earlier, buried inside a modernization package containing hundreds of technical changes. I approve this, she said. Daniel carefully shook his head. You approve the package. The engineering recommendation came through 3 departments. But my name is on it. No one answered. Victoria looked at Ethan. For the first time since he had entered Hale Dynamics, there was no defensiveness in her face. I spent all morning demanding that you take responsibility for disrupting my company. Her voice lowered, and I hadn't taken responsibility for my own signature. Ethan glanced at the tablet. Then start now. She nodded. No excuses. No argument. Marcus, assemble the engineering team. Daniel, notify federal procurement that we identified the modification and are correcting it. Claire, tell the board I'll meet them after the technical review. Claire hesitated. They're demanding an explanation. They'll get one. From me. The next 9 hours transformed the 56th floor. Jackets came off. Coffee cups multiplied. The billion-dollar celebration banners remained glowing outside, while engineers worked beneath them, correcting the flaw that almost passed unnoticed. Ethan sat beside Marcus, comparing legacy architecture against the modern code line by line. Victoria Staff. She asked questions instead of issuing conclusions. Near 6 p.m., Ethan called Lily. I'm going to miss dinner. Important meeting? She asked. Ethan smiled. Something like that. Are you fixing it? We're trying. Lily paused. Then bring me pancakes tomorrow. Deal. Shortly after 9 o'clock, Marcus ran the first corrected simulation. Pass. The second passed. Then the third. Ethan did not celebrate. Independent validation. By midnight, the outside review team completed 12 additional tests without reproducing the fault. At 12:37 a.m., Ethan finally placed his signature beneath the compliance certification. Victoria watched him close the file. So it comes back? Tomorrow morning, procurement can restore the agreement to the execution schedule. She exhaled slowly. The contract had been saved, but she seemed less interested in the money than she had been 12 hours earlier. Why did you help me? She asked. I didn't. Ethan picked up his backpack. I helped the people depending on the system. Your company happened to benefit. Victoria almost smiled. Fair enough. The following morning, employees were called into the atrium. Ethan stood near the back, hoping to leave unnoticed after collecting his final documents. Victoria stepped before the crowd. Yesterday, I ordered a man removed from this building because I judged his appearance, his position, and his refusal before I judged his evidence. The room became still. Ethan Cole identified a flaw that could have cost this company far more than a contract. Instead of listening, I tried to silence him. That was my failure. She turned toward Ethan. Mr. Cole, I owe you an apology. Every face followed her gaze. Ethan walked forward slowly. Accepted. Victoria extended her hand. He shook it. The board wants to offer you a permanent executive position, she said. Ethan gave a small smile. No, a few employees blinked in surprise. More money. No, then what do you want? Ethan looked toward Marcus and the engineers standing nearby. Build a company where the person with the evidence doesn't need an important title before somebody listens. Victoria Nadif. Done. Ethan adjusted the faded backpack over his shoulder and headed toward the doors. Mr. Cole, Victoria called. He turned. Yesterday, before you made that call, you asked whether I was sure. I remember. What would you say to me now? Ethan thought of Lily, waiting for pancakes, and of the 17-second phone call that had made a billion-dollar contract disappear without changing the man who made it. Next time, listen before you decide who deserves respect. No one applauded. Somehow applause would have made the moment smaller. Victoria lowered her eyes. Marcus stood quietly beside the engineers, and across the marble atrium, hundreds of people understood the same simple truth at once. Power can command a room, money can purchase influence, and pride can make people look important, but dignity needs none of them. Ethan opened the glass doors and stepped into the cool Chicago morning, walking toward his old pickup and the daughter waiting for him at home. Behind him, the entire room remained silent.